So there it is then, another race done, another win for Max Verstappen, but not your usual podium as Lewis Hamilton and George Russell come home second and third respectively. What a race for Mercedes. A fantastic result. They definitely wouldn't have expected, but it carries on the theme of their season of being there to pick up the pieces when everything else isn't going straight forward for the teams around them. Obviously today, that being Ferrari, with Charles Leclerc having his accident, Carlos Sainz having to start from the back, and his medium tyres not being able to take him to the end of the race, so having to pit again, left Russell, obviously, and Perez as well, free to finish ahead of Carlos Sainz, and then Lewis kind of having a race all on his own. It must have been pretty boring for Lewis in the end. Didn't really have anyone attacking him from behind, and then obviously coming home for what felt like an easy second place behind Max Verstappen. Obviously a 10-second gap to Max in the end, but if you consider how Mercedes were at the start of the season, for them to be in this constant point scoring position right at the top, ready to take those points whenever opportunities present themselves, and actually Russell taking the fight to Perez today. Not sure if that says more about Perez's performance in the Red Bull or about Mercedes' increased performance, but certainly making strides, definitely getting closer. Clearly not quite on the pace of the front two, but they're ready and waiting, and hopefully with a few more upgrades we'll be ready to make it a full-on three-way fight at the front. But today's video is going to be about the top 5 takeaways from the French Grand Prix weekend, so let's get straight into it. Here we go then. In at number 1, we have the fact that Charles Leclerc and Ferrari are not ready to challenge for the F1 World Championship and or the Constructors. I think it's quite clear that Charles Leclerc still has too many mistakes in his locker. He completely fessed up that it wasn't an issue with the car. It was indeed a mistake on his part, pushing too hard at that stage of the race when he didn't necessarily need to. And I think, you know, he was pretty much set for a win today. I think he had the pace in the car. He'd weathered the storm of Verstappen behind. Verstappen obviously had come in for the earlier pit stop, but I think there was enough pace in that Ferrari to see out for the win. But at the very least, he was guaranteed a second place. And the fact that he hasn't finished, leaving him a massive 63 points behind Max Verstappen, I think leaves in no question that unless there is a huge capitulation on the part of Verstappen, Leclerc simply is not ready to challenge for that title. And I think, as I say, it's Verstappen's to lose, to go and make mistakes himself that I don't think he's going to make. I think Charles Leclerc on his day is as quick as anyone on the grid, but unfortunately he does not have the level of consistency needed to lead that Ferrari team to a championship fight, in my opinion, at this stage of his career. But we know how hard he's working on his mentality. We've heard today that he's been working with a psychologist, someone that he can speak to, and trying to get into that mental side. And I love that he's doing that. I love how hard he's working to try and improve his performances. But the fact is, he's not there yet. There's work to be done. And for him, obviously, you know, he's considered the lead driver in that team. I think he needs to step up his game, and we'll see how he improves over the rest of the season. Certainly, he needs within the next 5 races to have 2 wins where Verstappen doesn't finish, in my opinion, for him to get anywhere near back into this fight. So hopefully that can happen for the neutral fans and for just the fans of F1. I think that would be good for the sport to have a really good title fight that goes to the end of the season. Though at this time, it seems pretty clear that Verstappen's going to go ahead and defend that Drivers' World Championship that he's got. But certainly, I think on today's evidence and previous evidence where he's made mistakes in the past, I just don't think he's quite ready yet to lead Ferrari into another world championship. So in at number 2 then, and carrying on the theme of Ferrari, we have the fact that Sainz is ready to challenge Leclerc for that top spot in the Ferrari team. I think we know how many struggles Sainz had at the beginning of the season. He's clearly getting to grips with the car, and he was faster than Leclerc throughout this weekend. And we know that Leclerc had sort of balance setup issues with the car, but usually that, you know, that's the sign of a driver getting frustrated when they start to come out with those sort of comments. You know, we look at Riccardo; he's always talking about how he's struggling with the setup of his McLaren, and really he's just not getting on with the car. I think Leclerc obviously has shown this season, of course, he is strong in that car and he can pull out a good performance. But I think Sainz, on the other hand, rather than starting strong, he's grown into the season. Something he's done before. He's grown into the car. He's getting it, getting used to how it works, getting used to how he's going to perform and modify his driving style to suit these new F122 cars and the Ferrari that he's got this season. And he's clearly coming up with a level of performance at the moment, at least for the last race or two, that Leclerc can't match. I think it's fantastic to see Carlos Sainz doing it. I hope that he can continue in that vein, and we need to see them both fighting at the front. Sainz, you can't keep having Sainz fall away from Leclerc and Verstappen, and I think today on pace, if everyone had been in their normal position, Sainz had to win that race. He was the quickest all weekend. I have no question that Sainz was ready to take another race win today after finally getting his first. So unfortunate for him to have the penalties he did. Obviously benefited by the fact that he had brand new components in that engine. You could see from the speed traps that records that he was easily the fastest on the straights. And whether that was a setup choice as well, maybe he ran less wing than his teammate Leclerc. But you've got to think it did come down to as well the fact that he was running brand new engine components. So great for him, a fantastic drive, and for me, my driver of the day, I think Lewis, a close second, obviously having a great race to come home in second place. Verstappen not doing much wrong either, but for me to come back from last, to be running around, the top four, obviously had to force to pit because the Ferrari saying his tyres wouldn't make it to the end of the race, but that's no hit on Sainz. Some of the racing was fantastic, the overtakes were fantastic, again, kind of like his season, a slow start to the race, but he was starting on the hard tyre, so maybe struggled to get them up to temperature. But once he did, he was flying through the field and had a fantastic race. So for me, he's driver of the day, and I think proving, especially over the last couple of races, that he could be ready to challenge Leclerc over the rest of the season for who is considered the #1 driver at Ferrari. I do suspect Ferrari as a team will continue to back Leclerc, but I do think at the very least Sainz will be giving them a lot to think about. In at number 3 then, we have Mercedes have proved their world-class racing credentials with their huge double podium. Obviously, they've not got the pace to outright beat the Red Bulls and the Ferraris, but one thing they have been consistently getting right is their strategy calls, decisions, how much they push during the race, even their development cycle. Obviously, they've not started the season with the best car, but the fact that they're getting so close to the front already, a clear gain in performance from the beginning of the season to now, and obviously the teams ahead of them have had the same time to develop, and Mercedes are definitely catching. So they continue to prove what a world-class outfit they are, and I fully expect them to get back fighting at the front before long. Obviously, we kind of hoped it would be already, but it doesn't quite work like that, especially with the budget caps and the restricted time that they've got with the wind tunnel and things this season. It's not unexpected that it's taking a bit longer than maybe with Mercedes would have been able to catch up in the past, but to see them already catching up, and especially when you look at other teams, previous giants like McLaren, like Renault or Alpine now, who you fully expect should be able to develop their cars as well, they simply cannot or have not been able to prove yet that they can develop a car as quickly as the Mercedes juggernaut. And it's going to be interesting to see how long it takes for Mercedes to be back fighting for the championships, because at this rate, if not the end of this season, the beginning of next and all of next season, you have to expect Mercedes will be there with their performance matching their strategic ability, and they're just best in the business. I don't think there's any arguing it. I think when they've got the car, and there's a reason they won all those constructors and drivers championships in a row, they are the best at what they do, with the car and the strategic decisions being made on the pit wall as well, and you can't argue it. I think they've been absolutely fantastic. It's another brilliant race for them today, and to come home with a second and third with the car that they've got, I think is absolutely brilliant. Well done to them. I know that they obviously could capitalize on what's in front of them, but you've got to be there to do it. And throughout the race, it was so calm for them. No issues. Obviously, Russell kind of giving himself some headaches, but what he did on the restart of Perez seems to be really, really interesting. Apparently, sort of holding back on the delta time so he could floor it when it went green and get the jump on Perez. I think if he's nailed that, Really did nail that. It was a really, really good move from him. So a fantastic day for Mercedes overall. But the fact is, they're still the best team in the business. And as soon as they get that performance right, I think they're going to be hard to stop. So in at number 4, then, we have the fact that McLaren, their upgrades have not worked this weekend. I think they got huge hope from their performance on Saturday. Obviously, the qualifying, especially Norris, was a really, really good performance. But what we saw was that on race pace, if anything, they've gone backwards or they've stayed exactly the same. I think on race pace, Alpine looked the quicker car. Obviously, Ocon getting Ricciardo towards the end of the race, and Ricciardo nearly getting caught by the Aston Martins at the end, and they've been nowhere really this season. So to see Ricciardo nearly down with the Aston Martins was really disappointing after we've heard so much about how much he's improved this weekend. So he's going to be really disappointed to actually have fallen back that far. I think he was a good 12 15 seconds off Norris by the end of the race, which doesn't sound like a significant amount, but for him to be near those Astons instead of up fighting the Alpines, I think it is a huge disappointment in the end for Ricciardo in what was a stronger weekend for him. Obviously, Norris still getting the better of the car, but still struggling. You know, he was up there. I think for me, I was hoping that he'd be able to fight the Mercedes. He split them in qualifying, but immediately dropped back down behind Russell, behind Alonso, and he couldn't recover. He didn't have the pace in the car to recover those positions. And he was lucky, I think, in the end to have enough pace to stay ahead of Ocon. But just not a great day for McLaren. There was really big hopes for them with the upgrades that they brought. Similar with Mercedes, obviously they brought upgrades, and it's obviously not worked out as well as McLaren would hope. They may well have more upgrades in the pipeline. They may be able to make a few adjustments. It may just be that they're still learning with the upgrades that they've brought, but it certainly seems to have helped them on the Saturday. Ricciardo obviously having one of his best qualifying performances of the season, and Norris having one of his best qualifying performances of the season. But on race day, it was business as usual, and they fell back down. So work to do for McLaren if they want to overhaul Alpine now, who have moved ahead of them in the Constructors before the end of the season. Finally, then, in at number 5, we have the fact that obviously this was looking like the last race at Paul Ricard and a French Grand Prix for at least a few years to come as they look to move off of the F1 calendar. And personally, I don't think it's going to be a race we miss that much on today's evidence. I think it wasn't the most exciting race. Obviously, the safety car added a bit of excitement. We had a few overtakes here and there, but when you compare it to the races we've had in Austria, Canada, Silverstone this year, it hasn't lived up to it. It felt more like a Miami than it did an Austria. It didn't feel like a race that we couldn't do without, and it probably didn't do itself any favors if it is hunting to stay in the conversation, to stay on the F1 calendar. I like Paul Ricard. I think it's a lovely circuit. I think the fan turnout was absolutely brilliant. I think the best we've ever seen it. Hamilton made comments to that effect, but it wasn't the best race to watch, at least not from what we were shown on the TV cameras. I think maybe the fans saw some stuff we didn't. They did tend to cut away from action when it was happening. That certainly didn't help, but they tend to do that a lot, to be fair, on the TV broadcasting, which has always been a frustration of mine. But I think it's fair to say that if it didn't work, if it didn't produce exciting racing with these new cars that have proven that at the right tracks, that it's there to be had, right? The overtaking, the battles, the wheel-to-wheel racing is there to be had at the right circuits. Paul Ricard didn't produce it today. So it won't be, I think, a huge miss to the calendar. I hope they can come back, and maybe as these cars develop, it can be a more exciting race in the future. But I certainly don't have any huge, really memorable races. As we heard prior to the race, I think today was the first time that the person on pole hasn't won, and obviously that's only because Charles Leclerc binned it, spinning out and crashing into the wall. So any Grand Prix where the person on pole always wins, at least 9 out of 10 times, it's never going to be the most exciting place for racing and overtakes. Generally, that as a rule, that won't be the case. So, as I say, great fans, great experience, great, some good racing today. But let's hope that whatever race they replace it with, obviously Vegas, looking like the race that's going to replace it. Let's hope that it can produce some better racing than the Paul Ricard. I don't want to see us going to tracks that are purely for, bringing in money And I hope that Vegas doesn't turn out to be one of those where it's just we go there and it produces more money for F1. It needs to produce good racing, and it needs to give fans a reason to tune in and watch. We don't need any more processions. I think Monaco procession once a year is enough. I think we accept that. We accept that's the Saturday where fans tune in for the Saturday and then kind of just enjoy the race on a Sunday, knowing that it's going to be a bit of a procession. But we can only have one of those a year. The rest of the races, Monaco withstanding, need to be good, decent races with lots of overtaking. I don't think it was terrible today, but not as good as it has been at other tracks. And if we are going to lose it and other tracks are coming in, I just hope they can produce better racing than what we saw today. But sad to see, as I say, that the French fans not going to be around anymore in the F1 calendar. I feel the same way about Germany. I'd love to see us racing back at Hockenheim or the Nürburgring. I think those tracks are brilliant. The fans in Germany are brilliant. And I think not having a German Grand Prix has been a huge loss to the F1 calendar. So that, for me personally, is a huge disappointment. And I'm sure the French will feel the same way about their home Grand Prix. But still, hopefully we'll be back again in the future and we'll see some better racing overall than we did today. But as I say, not going to be a huge loss, I think, Paul Ricard at least. And hopefully the tracks that replace it will prove to be of benefit to the fans as well as the owners of F1. So that's it then. They're my top 5 big takeaways from the French Grand Prix. Make sure to let me know in the comments what you thought of the race. Did you think it was a good race, one that you enjoyed? Are you sad to see Paul Ricard leave the F1 calendar? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. And if you are new around here, do make sure to subscribe to the channel to be notified of all future uploads. Get involved in the chat. It's all about F1 opinion. I want to know what you think about all the topics I've raised today, and maybe what your top takeaways were. What have I missed? What did you see that I haven't brought up? And obviously get involved in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll be up again soon with new uploads, so make sure to hit that bell icon to be notified of all future content. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.